IDW Sonic Comic Issue 18. We start out with Starline talking to Eggman again. He says he doesn't understand and asks why Eggman's going out of his way to infect a village that's too remote to be of any strategic value. You'd think if he really understood Eggman, or was smart, he would understand right away that Eggman wants everyone roboticized. He said he wants no more free will. Why won't he understand that he'd want to roboticize any village on the way? It's another thing that just confuses the audience into wondering if Starline's morally opposed to the metal virus at the end of the day, because he doesn't love it as much as Eggman does. Eggman's pretty sweet to him if he calls him "my dear Starline" on a whim. He says that this lush space will become a minefield of infection vectors that not even Sonic can avoid. What makes him think that? Why would it be any different than any other remote village? Oh, he says Sonic will run right into it because he has some friends here. The downside of him knowing where some of his friends live. I guess, once again, you'll be able to easily predict the next victim based on who's the least popular character among the Sonic fanbase, because meta logic. Sadly, before I could see Starline's response to him to clarify what I was confused about, the story cuts to Sonic in Floral Forest Village being taunted by Eggman's spaceship. In real life, villages aren't called, like, whatever village or whatever town. It'd just be the name of the village and that's it. We don't need the word village to be in the name to tell us it's a village. But at least the writer's trying. I still don't know where this place is in relation to the other places we've seen. So I'm still not as invested in the world as it could be. I like that Sonic's so mad at Eggman, taking things seriously. He's trying to find Cream. Somehow Vanilla needs to tell Cream to close the shutters and get away from the window. Somehow they haven't already closed the window when they know what's going on in the village. This unbelievable dumbassery is going to be foreshadowing, isn't it? It's survival of the fittest in a situation like this, and based on how Flynn wrote the main Sonic characters even before IDW, most of them are established to be complete idiots who would never survive it. Vanilla pushes a bookshelf against the door as Cream wants to go help her neighbors. Vanilla says this isn't like her adventures with Amy and she's still a little girl. And they're not heroes like them. She expects that to be a good enough argument for Cream when Cream's already been a hero before. She was with Amy and all Sonic heroes just fine. But that's not comparable to this. It's weird that in all of the franchise, this seems like the first time Vanilla's been written to have the realistic reaction a mother would have to the idea of Cream wanting to go out freedom fighting. In Sonic X, she was shockingly lenient and let her go out into space. But that struck me as pretty bad writing. So while she's different in character here, it's also for the best. Not that's gonna matter, I guess. Flynn immediately made it predictable that Charmy was gonna get himself roboticized eventually, and now it's like he's doing the issue's foreshadowing again by showing us why Cream's an idiot too. She thinks she'll be fine because Cheese always looks after her. It does make sense that she convinced herself she'd be fine in dangerous situations because she was fine before. And while she's not being genre savvy of what you have to do in a zombie apocalypse, I don't believe that Vanilla and her would have ever watched any kind of zombie fiction. I can imagine Vanilla would have been very strict about what she'd be allowed to watch, and she wouldn't have gotten to watch any scary movies. So of course she'd have no genre savviness. I've never watched any zombie movies either. The closest I've gotten to that is iZombie. But even I have enough common sense to assume that trying to get people to safety wouldn't be worth the risk to yourself and would be delaying the inevitable anyways. But if everyone thought that selfishly, then no one would be led to safety. I love that Vanilla rolls her eyes at her. At least Vanilla admits that Cream is brave and noble and has done great things. She asks her to stay here and protect their home, and Cream agrees. It seems suspect that Flynn only bothered to introduce these characters to IDW in the Metal Virus arc where everyone's expendable because robotization is a bigger threat than it's ever been. You'd think if he really liked these characters, they'd be in the previous arc. Cream asks General to go protect the village. And General suddenly talks like a generic robot saying request acknowledged, ceding to assist village defenses. He talks like a person in the reboot and it was immediately enjoyable. He didn't talk like this in Sonic Battle, so this doesn't make any sense. Again, since I've heard that the mandates aren't really by Sega, I know they weren't in Archie anyways, they're by the Archie art directors. And Flynn outright bragged that he has more control over IDW than he ever had for Archie. So I have to wonder if the only reason Flint's choosing to write General in this horrendous way, other than wanting to follow a lazy cliche that he's a robot and this takes advantage of that, is that he's trying to trick fans into thinking that he's restricted by Sega creatively. I don't even understand why Sega would want this, because again, he didn't talk like this in Sonic Battle, so that's not canon to the games, and this is going off the games. He didn't talk like this in Sonic Advance 3 when he was General either. Starline smiles when he says that the village is rapidly succumbing to the metal virus, even with the low population density. And he's not even being looked at right now, so he wouldn't have to fake a smile. Eggman says he's a true genius. A lot of these scenes feel expendable. They're telling you a character's character, but it's what we already know. Starline doesn't contradict him, and Eggman talks to a microphone and orders all of the Robians to pile up on Sonic. As it turns out that he started calling them Zombots on his own by coincidence. Then the Robians don't move, and Cubot tells Eggman that they aren't following his orders. This came out of complete nowhere. We've already seen the robot rabbit immediately follow Eggman's order to back off and stand with its back to an animal. And more importantly, we saw a bunch of villagers pointlessly stand still and wait to get an order and only wander off when they were told to. So it seems completely forced that these Robians, infected by the exact same metal virus, would suddenly not want to follow Eggman's every order when that's been the case for all of them. Eggman didn't change the programming. If the metal virus was always like this, the villagers of Windmill would have wandered off immediately without... Why would the metal virus change as it spread from the nanobots making new nanobots? Why and how would the programming change? Did Metal Sonic change it? It would make more sense for Metal Sonic to be the one to change it, because as a robot who thinks he's better than Sonic because of it, he'd rather have everyone be robots faster. And it would take longer if the Robians wanted to follow Eggman's dumb order to try to run after freaking Sonic instead of focusing on trying to infect every villager first. Which would be infecting a whole bunch of people instead of bothering just one person. I don't know what Eggman was thinking trying to order the Robians to run after Sonic anyways, because it's not like they run at the speed of sound. So they'd have no chance whatsoever of catching up to him. Only the ones close to his ultimate destination of Cream's house would have any reason to bother trying to converge and surround the place, and only after Sonic would get there. Also, if he's trying to keep it a secret from Sonic that he's actually a sleeper agent and he can roboticize him with the press of a button as soon as he's close to a huge amount of his friends at once, then it would make sense that Eggman would order a bunch of Robians to run after him because he's trying to keep his covered up. He'd have no reason to think that there was anything special going on with the metal virus on him. The whole point of the metal virus was to get rid of free will. So it doesn't make any sense that even through a glitch, it would lose its whole purpose for Eggman. It barely has any programming at all. Again, scientists in real life have failed to create AI with full free will and are 100 years away from it. So why would free will happen by accident when it requires 100 years' worth of intentional effort? I guess we're supposed to immediately believe that if Metal Sonic could get free will on his own, it'd make just as much sense for the Robians to, and that'd be inevitable. But it was confusing for Metal Sonic, let alone the Robians. His Badniks don't have this problem. At least with Metal Sonic, he was based on Sonic, who has free will. Which is why he needed inhibitors, because if he was being the way he naturally was, he wouldn't want to work for Eggman by default. But he still didn't have free will for 5 years, so why would he get it on his own? What took him so long? You'd think the nanobots would be able to infinitely get all the necessary materials for a proper metal virus out of a person's body in thin air for the rest of time. Why would any of the nanobots end up with a missing necessary ingredient? They were specifically programmed to get their ingredients out of a person's body in air. I assume because where else would they get it from? How would they be able to make more of them and spread if the ingredients are only in the base ship? But everyone's bodies would contain the same ingredients and would be assumed to. Orbot says that there's been a steady decline in Robians listening to Eggman's voice commands since they started. And I assume the reason he's waited until now to tell him this is out of fear. So this is what was being talked about. This is what I was complaining about earlier when I said that Eggman would somehow manage to screw up roboticization, whenever other Eggman got it right on the first try. But it makes sense that an Eggman would be too ambitious with it and make it infectious on top of that. Starline asks how this is possible. Good, someone speaks for the audience. Eggman has an oddly calm reaction and says that since it is a virus, spreading from exposure may be prompting random mutations in the coding. It's not a regular virus. Coding can't have mutations. Copying and pasting text over and over again doesn't cause it to look different after a while. You'd have to make mutations in the physical appearance of the nanobots making up the metavirus. But again, how would that happen? How would they change? Nanobots don't have DNA that can be corrupted after replicating wrong. I guess the nanites went to a few people who, through genetic mutation disability, were lacking one of the key ingredients needed for the development of a proper metavirus. And Eggman had no choice but to have the nanobots be made out of that, and that ingredient was necessary for the making of the part of the nanobot that told it to inhibit free will. For example, if it requires iron for the inhibiting of free will, if it went to someone with an iron deficiency, it wouldn't get enough iron. So some of the nanobots that would be made would be screwed up. This is ridiculous. I don't know why the nanobots wouldn't just be made of one ingredient, like carbon. Why won't they all be made of carbon nanotubes? Doesn't everyone have carbon in their bodies easily? Programming is just electricity, ones and zeros, an absence and non-absence of electricity. But the way programming ends up being is determined by the exact physical shape of a machine. So I guess it can make sense that if a nanobot's not fully formed, part of its programming could end up being blocked from execution from damage to the machine itself. Because since the nanobot's so tiny, every single part of it possible would be dedicated to holding the programming. So the part of it with a line of code talking about free will will be cut off. I just can't understand why a nanobot would require multiple types of ingredients from people or air. Or blood. It's already so small. But to be fair, I don't know how to make nanobots or how they work. I assume they're made by lasers, carving stuff into microscopic shapes. Maybe I do have to make them out of more than one type of materials, instead of just making them out of one element on the periodic table. After all, nanobots would be like computers. They'd have to have a basic CPU. And I have a feeling that computers aren't just made out of one type of metal. And that would have to be for a reason. Besides cost effectiveness, because Eggman's rich. I really wish the story was written well enough to have explained what I just did. I was already told that there's a formula for the metavirus, and so it requires multiple ingredients. Even if that just means 2. Maybe the new ingredients, weren't capable of holding programming in it. They would just burn the nanobots, because of the electricity going into it. Starline calls out Eggman for not accounting for that possibility, and Eggman points out that he can work out the bugs in post. And the metavirus is still spreading like he wants. That's what I said earlier. Starline's scared of this spreading out of control. It'd be nicer of him to have been upset with it before it got out of Eggman's control. Eggman says that he'll find a way to control it, and tells me he's ruined his good mood and he wants to eat, because they really want to portray him as careless. To be fair, like I said at the very start of the arc, Eggman has every reason to believe a brilliant scientist could find a way to control it. With the nanobots, you fight fire with fire. Because the only thing that would affect a tiny thing is another tiny thing. All I'd have to do is make a swarm of flying nanobots with the antidote to the corrupted metavirus and send it at it. Since it's so simple that even I immediately thought it up and I'm not a super genius mad scientist like him, there's no excuse for Eggman not explaining this obvious solution himself. At least the writing's not as forced as I expected, because he does think he'll be able to fix the metavirus. And realistically, he's right. Just make a bunch of antidote fireflies. If I was actually shown Eggman panicking and think he had no chance of that, I would be absolutely pissed and call him incompetent for being portrayed as helpless. But right here, just because Starline is short-sighted enough to think Eggman's helpless here doesn't mean he's right. And I hope we're not supposed to think Eggman is helpless. Because if he can create the metal virus, if he can swarm the planet with one virus, nothing's stopping him from doing it again with an antidote. And maybe this one could be made out of ingredients that aren't missing in some people with genetic abnormalities. I don't buy that any specific combination of chemicals would magically cause a liquid to turn people into robots. who were programmed specifically to obey Eggman's orders. That's just way too specific. I guess it's just a matter of what kind of materials for a nanobot would make sure that the nanobots would survive the body of a Mobian. Starline asked Orbot if he could confide in him. Aw, that's sweet. Orbot says he can if he keeps his next break a secret, and he agrees. That's also sweet. It's the little things that matter when it comes to a villain. Starline says that ever since he started his world conquest, he's been fascinated by Eggman, and devoted himself to robotics and the search for powers because of him. And whenever he reached an impasse, he'd think, what would Eggman do? He's done so much, driven by what he thought he knew about Eggman. But he's always assumed Sonic defeated him because he was so powerful. But now it looks like the real cause is Eggman can't plan for or adapt to the long term. Eggman did plan for the long term when he made the Egg Carrier 2, specifically in case Chaos rebelled. The only thing weird was that he somehow convinced himself he could attack Perfect Chaos, when you'd think the stone tablets would have told him Perfect Chaos was invincible. But as for SA2, yeah, that was really obvious. If Eggman could plan for the long term, he would have put cybernetics in Shadow or nanobots that would blow up if you went against him, forcing him to stay loyal to him, even if that wouldn't have made a difference in SA2. It would have let Eggman blow up Shadow the minute he decided to go against his next plan. It was common sense of him to put bombs in his henchmen Suicide Squad style if he was going to take the risk of trusting organic henchmen. In fact, he logically should have done that to Rouge too. I always loved Rouge teasing Eggman, and she and Shadow made great henchmen for him with their personalities and abilities. They could have been better than Orbot and Cubot. So yeah, his inability to plan for the long term should have been obvious the minute Rouge and Shadow left Eggman's side and lived. Even then though, that was just one game's worth of a mistake. If Eggman was incapable of planning for the long term, he wouldn't have thought to mechanize the time meter to force it to not betray him. He was betrayed by Dark Gaia right away, but it's 50-50. Half of the time he does prove he can think ahead and make a plan. I guess it's not contrived that he had bad luck with those odds. I don't buy that this leading to Silver's future would be remotely plausible. His future would have been full of Robians, not been absent to people entirely. Orbot tells Starline that it's about 50-50 to be honest, with a big idea and big execution where Sonic always wins. Again, you'd think after Sonic Unleashed, Starline would have expected this. To be fair, Eggman trying and failing to take control of Dark Gaia was between Sonic and Eggman and Chip. Maybe they never told anyone about that. So I'm not as mad about this as I expected. It's irritating, but Eggman remains confident, which is in character, instead of scared because drama when we already know it's dramatic. Sonic tells the crowd that a shuttle is coming and everyone should head north to the glade. Is he seriously just standing still the whole time he's thinking? Why? How is he not getting fully roboticized in all this time? He needs to go for a run to burn it off, but he can't leave the villagers yet. Why not? General. He thinks he can't just run in place or do donuts because that wouldn't be fast enough. He has to be fast enough now? Doing donuts would probably mean spin dashing around in a circle to knock away any robots, for example. How am I supposed to believe that wouldn't be fast enough? We know Sonic needs to be running for a bit to accelerate to top speed, but what about turning would make him not top speed anymore? It's not like he's a car. He can do a drift. Did he forget about Sonic Unleashed? He can drift, and that preserves his speed. It's already confusing enough that I'm expected to believe that his mere speed can burn off the metal virus. Now I'm supposed to believe it has to be a certain speed? It was already ridiculous. General then tells Sonic that he's a threat, and Sonic recklessly says he can keep it under control. Sonic tells him he can run it off. He asks if General can help as he just stands there some more. He says General can bond with machines, and he could bond with him or another Robian. General says that he can't control the metallic virus, and he can't infect him. Well, duh. Tails already told Sonic that metal things can't be infected. Even though there's still people in need of help, General tells Sonic he can't help because he's a threat, and tells him to reduce his threat level or be eliminated. And somehow Sonic doesn't agree right away, when General's there to protect Cream anyways. And thankfully he does run away when he threatens to arm his missiles. General tries to shoot the Robians with missiles, and Cream runs at him to tell him to stop. If General had a brain, he'd tell her that Tails can just put the Robians back together after he finds a cure. If Cream had a brain, she'd at least assume Tails can put the Robians back together, even if she instinctively tells him not to hurt them because they used to be regular villagers. I don't know why Cream is insisting on talking to General outside of her house. That's unbelievably dumb. She can just talk to him from her window. You think a robot would have the best hearing possible, and you think after all the time she's known him, she would know that he can hear her from the window. So you think that he'd immediately force her to go back inside, and at least tell her to continue her conversation from the window. Anyways, as the Robians somehow don't go attack them in all of the time they're talking, when nothing is forcing them not to run at them, but I guess they have the free will to prefer to preserve themselves when facing a robot with missiles. Not to mention a robot that's protecting Cream, the only one they can infect. Cream makes him think he made a mistake because he attacked a victim trying to save the town. Why does General think Cream was right? His threat level was still at over 50%. It sure is lucky that someone talking like a stereotypical robot is able to be reasoned with by Cream. This is a bit interesting, actually. It's like if Metal Sonic was being reasoned with by Cream, and Metal Sonic was a good guy. Cream tells General what's sympathetic about the Robians, and asks him if he thinks they should be fixed later on like he was. He pushes one of them away and says that he understands, and he should only use non-lethal force, and merely delay and detain and disable, not destroy. Why wasn't he told this from the start? Can there even be lethal force against robots that can just regenerate their arms? Like, what's the limit? Like, we should have been told what the limit was. It should have been obvious to Cream and Vanilla from the beginning that a robot armed with missiles that can generate infinitely from thin air would instinctively want to try to destroy Robians first and foremost. They could have very easily avoided Cream putting herself at risk having this long talk with them outside. Because he should have known this already. She thankfully hugs him and thanks him, and tells him to apologize to Sonic when he gets back, and thankfully General agrees. Then Cream notices that she left the door open. Who would be that stupid? Nobody. Even little girls have some common sense. Even if it was just robots that were swarming the village and not even Robians, you'd think she'd still leave the door locked. Then we see, for once, a fanboy of Sonic's. So for once, Sonic feels like an actual celebrity. He asks Sonic why he takes Cream on adventures and not him. That's realistic after all of this time. Sonic says Cream's a great kid with lots of potential. It's nice of him to immediately answer honestly instead of just being annoyed at a fan. But why doesn't he simply say that she has a magical ability? It should have been immediately obvious to this guy why he takes Cream and not him. One, he knows she can fly, unless he has a magical power too. But he should have told Sonic about that right away. Why would he think he'd be useful to Sonic? Sonic asks what he's doing, and he says that if he burns down the forest before the infection spreads, they all won't be changed. I understand his reasoning, because plants can be infected. It's still not going to get rid of the Robians, though. Wait, they're all standing on grass. Why the hell didn't the Robians instinctively lean down and infect the grass, if their first instinct is to infect trees when they see them? Well, to be fair, they're apparently not very bright anymore because of the metal virus. I say that because they don't run at every opportunity. Maybe they just weren't programmed well enough. They were simply programmed to go infect people because Eggman hates free will. And trees because they're right there. If Eggman thought ahead enough, he'd have them all infect grass first and foremost. If Starline was the one in charge, all the heroes would be screwed. Nobody would have a chance. Even in Archie, Adam had the grass be roboticized by nanobots as soon as possible in issue 152. The nanobots all spread away and turned a forest into a whole nanobot city that Nicole ended up taking over. There's no way this wasn't an inspiration for that. There's no way this didn't take inspiration from that. Sonic says that they might all just be consumed by flames instead. He'd be more convincing if he told him that the grass would catch on fire after the forest did. And Cream gets to hang with him because she got some sense. That's what he thinks. But I guess Flynn is writing him to be wrong. It's just frustrating because you'd think if he thought to have Sonic say she's smart, he would have her be smart. We'd see Vanilla in front of some Robians that the Chow are fighting off. And she tells Cream to run, as I'm just wondering why she doesn't run up to Cream, and why the hell she and the Chow didn't just get out of the house a long time ago if they were right next to the front door. Also, you'd think Cheese and Chocola would have been told a long time ago not to ever touch the Robians because they get infected. Cream can communicate with them. To be fair, maybe they know what'll happen to them and are performing a heroic sacrifice trying to buy them all time to escape the house. But they shouldn't have ever needed to do that in the first place, because if Cream could just immediately find Vanilla behind a door, what was stopping her from running out of it? I know fear can paralyze you, but she's been kidnapped before, in Sonic Advance 2. This is why Flint's a bad writer. He somehow sees nothing wrong with forcing characters to be impossibly stupid, because he's such a control freak apparently that he wants a plot to go how he wants, no matter how disrespectful it ends up being to the characters. Cheese and Chocola may be complete filler characters when you think about it. I always hated how they just said the word Chow over and over again. But they're still cute and cuddly and sweet, and even brave fighters. But yeah, I can't understand why I'd be fine with getting rid of some annoying filler characters. It still seems unusually spiteful though to have not even the Chow out plot armor in a kids' series. But I can see the logic at least. But again, it's impossible to respect the writing if the only logic is the meta logic, because it forces you to try to think about why the writer wants to make the story go this way, and that pulls you out of it instead of keeping you invested and moving through the story. Instead I have to stop everything to explain why he's doing this, because there's no sense in-universe. It wouldn't have happened. That's not how the story was naturally heading. Even if he thought they were both characters that should be roboticized, you think it'd be common sense to have it take longer to happen to Cheese, because everyone knows Cheese is better than Chocola, because Cheese sticks with her longer. So Cheese is more useful. Or at the very least, you'd think he'd have Chocola stay with Cream, because Chocola barely ever gets to attack things for her. That could be his time in the limelight. Instead, he seems to be the only person in the universe who thinks both Cheese and Chocola are equally expendable. Cream doesn't want to leave her Chow behind, even after seeing what happened to it, because she thinks in emotions instead of logic, but she is a kid. Then Vanilla can't leave her house because of Robian's in front of the door. Gee, too bad General scared Sonic away, huh? Too bad he's not focusing on the house. Oh good, he does save her, never mind. You'd think he'd be able to hear that there's Robians inside the house. General's a robot. So actually, you'd think Gemma would have saved Chocola and Cheese easily. He'd still prioritize helping the people in the house over fighting the people going to the house. He sees what happened to Chocola, and then he tries to tell Cream to be brave. And all this time I'm wondering why the hell they're not being run at and attacked by Robians, while he's telling Cream that no duh, Cheese wouldn't want her to be caught. Talking into free action is a really stupid and lame comic trope. And it's especially out of place in a zombie apocalypse. You shouldn't even need to say all this because it's such common sense. Too bad he thinks that if he touches her, he'll infect her, so he can't just pick her up and run away with her. He tells her to get Vanilla to the North Glade and get to safety. Sure as generous of the metal virus to not completely cover Sonic and all the time he's talking. Cream flies away carrying Vanilla, who thanks Sonic. Gemma goes to save Sonic, who thanks him. Gemma apologizes, and he says that was fast, just like how he likes it. Sonic traps Cheese and Chocola in bottles. Okay, but the bottles can only be kept against the ground when he has his hand against the top of it. Magically, that's not the case, and they don't immediately tip over the bottles and fly away anyways when he lets go. Why doesn't he spin dash into the ground and bury them? They'll just be found, and then people will have to deal with them again. Isn't that obvious? Like, how could he possibly be that stupid? I'm pretty sure he'd be able to find where they are, because it'd be the only place in the village where there's a patch of dirt, and he could tell Tails that's where he buried them. Because it doesn't look like the bottles are sunken into the ground or anything. Really? I hate them when Sonic's being called. We don't see anything on his ear, or even in it. He might as well be spoken to telepathically. It could have so easily been written that in IDW, Amy is telepathic. Which would work, because she likes tarot cards in Sonic CD's instruction manual, and she was a psychic in Flynn's other M comic. And she could have just learned how to be telepathic. And it wouldn't make a difference to the plots because it'd just be her calling her friends without them needing phones. Sonic's told that Eggman's on the way to Sunset City, where Shadow and Omega are heading. I guess Shadow's the next to go, since he's being written like Flynn hates him when it's not his fault that Shadow was written badly in Rise of Lyric. That's a different Shadow! It comes off as pretty standout bad writing if I can immediately figure out who's gonna get turned in the next issue. I feel like that'd be kinda amateurish for the writing of a zombie fiction, because Shadow's literally the only one that this would happen to, so the whole story's gonna be predictable. So I might as well not even read it. Because we've had a formula where someone gets roboticized in every issue. So what's the point of even buying the next issue? I guess in the hopes that it won't happen to him, but that's pretty naive at this point. I'm surprised Flynn didn't have Vanilla get roboticized in this issue, because I was already spoiled on that. And the same apparent logic for why it had to happen to the Chow would also apply to Vanilla. Who isn't a filler character if you go thinking outright cynical as possible Sonic 2 only game fan mode? If you thought that way, everyone except Sonic, Tails, Eggman, and Amy and Knuckles would be expendable. So are they the only ones with plot armor, aside from Sonic? It's really distracting when you can easily figure out from sheer meta logic who has to be the earliest victims of a virus. It's better for the tension when you know that everyone's equally vulnerable, which is realistic as opposed to it's whoever the writer decides to make really dumb on a whim. But at least this story did tension well because there was multiple characters, so who knows who could have gotten it. This issue is about Cheese and Chocola getting roboticized because of forced bad writing again. You'd expect her to have had this whole conversation about preserving lives at home with them. So Robians get into Vanilla's house. And what's really forced is that there's apparently no reason for why Vanilla and the Chow didn't just run out of the house, because all Cream has to do to reunite with them is walk in through a door. It's not like they were surrounded and she looked at them through a window. This was just a forced idiot ball on their part. The only good thing about this issue, aside from multiple people being potential victims, is that surprisingly, Vanilla wasn't a victim right away. Chocola and Cheese would have obviously been told not to directly touch the Robians a long time ago and not done so. They would have been told that it's pointless to try to fight off the Robians because it can just regenerate anyways. Also, General naturally thinks Sonic is a threat at first and delays them from saving Cream. It makes sense that Flynn would think the Chow are just annoying filler characters, but it still comes off as cruel. Imagine if they were puppies instead of Chow. It's like a writer not being too ashamed to do this to a puppy. Oh yeah, and Eggman finds out that because the metal virus coding mutated and spread, its victims aren't following his commands anymore. The writing doesn't try nearly hard enough to explain this, but it doesn't seem like it matters right now. I wasn't mad at this because Eggman stayed confident that he could fix it all later, which he obviously can if he can make a metal virus in the first place. So I'm not being told beyond a shadow of a doubt that he can't. So of course he'd want to delay trying to fix it until after all of his enemies get roboticized. I think the new metal virus lacks the proper ingredients from people's bodies to have all of it built correctly, because the new ones originated from people lacking ingredients from a genetic problem. Like if it needs iron, they went to people with an iron deficiency.